it's that completely random time of the year again when I bundle together games that won't be getting their own video, either because they're
not worthy,
because I don't think I'm going to be finishing them anytime soon, or ever, or because I'm not sure I'm the right person to be making a full 1-hour video about them. As you know, I review games using a system of categories that I think are relevant to the genre of the game at hand. And I don't know if you've noticed, but there's this little word that I throw in at the end of each segment as a final verdict. Well, this word is part of a system of tiers: the great, the good, the meh, the bad, and the ugly. So without further ado, here are the games that I have been playing lately from best to worst. The great.
There aren't any!
The good. Zoria Age of Shattering. The short version of my review would run thusly: a good little RPG that'll keep you decently entertained for a few dozen hours. Solid value for the price, a couple of interesting new ideas, and classic RPG concepts blended together in a moderately original way are Zoria's credentials. And if you ask me, they are well worth a shot if you are into RPGs and if you don't expect every game in the genre to be a masterpiece. But this channel isn't IGN, is it? So let's sink our teeth into the meat. Zoria Age of Shattering sits somewhere in between your typical Diablo-like isometric ARPG and your typical Baldur's Gate-like isometric CRPG. Except, combat is turn-based in Zoria, and it is the most important aspect of the game. Zoria takes place in large areas, not unlike the ones you have in your typical ARPG, where there are groups of enemies who need killing roaming around. There are also plenty of dungeons and towers for you to explore and kill things. Bad guys are loot piñatas almost as much as they are in your average ARPG, and collecting the coolest, shiniest piece of gear is almost on par with story-driven objectives as far as your incentive to go out and do stuff goes. Zoria's turn-based combat is simple and often even simplistic. For example, there's no initiative mechanic, so one side gets to go first and then the other side gets to go. And I've always felt like initiative mechanics add huge depth to combat in turn-based systems, but Zoria's combat is simplistic in other ways. In most D&D game-based games, for example, you have different conditions like paralyzed, stunned, or petrified, and different immunities and resistances to deal with. In Zoria, you don't have much beyond magical and physical armor, bleeding, poison, fire damage, and a few other forms of damage over time. And I'm totally okay with that. Combat doesn't need to have too many moving parts for it to be good. In fact, I prefer when it doesn't have a zillion effects and conditions, because more often than not, all these conditions, immunities, and effects translate into boring games of rock, paper, scissors, and they end up conditioning your success to your knowledge of the rules, and that sucks. But if a game doesn't feature too much depth in its action/counteraction and spell/counterspell dynamics, it should definitely compensate with smart enemy AI, intricate level design, and environmental elements to factor into the combat. But that's not the case with Zoria. There are a few interesting locations and a few ways to use the level design to your advantage, but it still falls far behind games like Expeditions Rome and Divinity Original Sin 2, to name a few. Games like the Pathfinders, the original Pillars of Eternity, and even its sequel to some extent, require the player to use flanking, kiting, and choke point tactics to sort out the fight. Combat tactics in Zoria are almost exclusively reduced to pulling enemies away from larger groups and into areas where you have an advantage, and an almost World of Warcraft-like approach to tanking and spanking. And I'm talking about the tactics that you use with regular mobs in WoW, not raids. You do have formations in Zoria, but you cannot switch companions when you are walking about. Your main character does all the walking and talking, and everyone follows behind. So it's not an uncommon occurrence for your formations to go out the window when your party engages the bad guys. I do like that combat does not immediately start when enemies are within the aggro range of your party. When you get within the bad guy's aggro range, they start to chase you until they are within striking distance, and that's when the combat encounter starts. This is pretty cool because you can lure enemies into ambushes, or you can pull them away from other groups of enemies who may potentially join the battle. There are several classes available in Zoria, and many companions for you to recruit. This means that you can experiment with different party compositions. While your overall tactics probably won't change too dramatically depending on which companions you have, each class has its own way to execute its role in combat. Priests, for example, can be superb healers or insane damage doers, but if you hone them to be healers, you can go for direct healing or healing over time spells. And combat clerics, for example, can also heal, but they are better suited to be hybrid frontliners. Classes are fairly interesting and they have some pretty cool talent, but the build aspect of the game per se is nothing to write home about. You can have several priests in your roster of soldiers, for example, and you can hone some of them to be more healing oriented and some others to be damage specialists, but this game doesn't give you anything to brag about with your nerd friends over on Discord, like, I like to use this special unique combination of skills that consists of blah 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 blah. So, if combat is nothing spectacular in Zoria, and the most important aspect of its gameplay mix is indeed combat, why is it on the good tier, you wonder? Well, I think Zoria does a pretty good job with the adventure aspect of the experience. I think the quality of everything the game has to offer is ramped up quite significantly by the feeling of adventure that you get in this game. For example, while combat isn't amazing, Zoria always makes a pretty good case story-wise for you to go out there and do some butt-kicking. The game starts with a hold the line kind of situation, like, Commander, we're being attacked, go out and fend off the invaders while we get the civilians out of here. Or, the enemy army is 2 days away, we need to reinforce this and that place. Or, these assassins are crippling trade and weakening our position for the impending enemy invasion, we need to do something about it. In Circus Electrique, for example, you had a full roster of combatants, just like you do in Zoria, and you assemble your party however you wish, but most of the characters in Circus Electrique are generic battle assets. Some of them get introduced as supposedly important characters, people who have some role to play in the story, but that ultimately goes nowhere because none of them ever show up again in any cutscene after they are introduced. But because Zoria thrives on the feeling of adventure, your companions always have something to say every time a quest is updated and completed. You even engage them in dialogue several times throughout a quest. Some of your partners even have companion quests, and some are even required to complete story-related missions. Zoria won't turn your 2024 on its ear, and it certainly won't revolutionize the world of gaming, but there are some interesting ideas in this title that I hope some other developers will take into consideration and explore further. For example, classes are important for more than just combat in this title. There are some areas that can only be accessed if you have someone with the right class to clear the obstacle. Mages can dispel illusions, Kingsmen can work out complex engineering machinery, priests can clear toxic fog, and lancers can tear down cracked walls. And there are many secondary quests that can only be completed by entering a place that you can only access if you have someone with the right class in your party. And there are some story bits here and there in which you gather your allies and hold meetings to decide what to do about this or that important issue. In these meetings, your companions say their piece, and sometimes it is quite an important piece. There is a stronghold management component in this game, and it is fairly robust. It reminds me of the stronghold management component in the original Pillars of Eternity and the Pathfinder games, but I like that it's not presented as something mandatory that you need to engage with in order to progress further into the game. It's something that you do because it benefits your other endeavors. Instead of having those companions who are not currently in your party sit around doing nothing, you can send them out on errands to retrieve items. Those companions who aren't with you in the party don't level automatically when they are not adventuring by your side, so sending them out on missions is a good way to keep them from falling behind while they do something useful in the process. There are different areas in your keep which are run by relevant NPCs who have quests to give you, valuable items to sell, and interesting quest rewards. The place also feels like it's relevant to the story, and therefore it is a place that feels like it's worth defending. But it's the camp feature that steals the show in this game. No, I'm not even kidding you. Zoria's camp feature has quickly become my favorite camp feature in an RPG. Outside camp and caravan mods in Skyrim, of course. It even surpasses Outward and Expeditions Viking in my book. Areas in Zoria are fairly big and fast travel is very limited, so you need to leg it between points of interest in your map. Dungeons, towers, and battlegrounds have multiple floors and they can be fairly big as well, and chances are that you are going to come across several groups of enemies as you travel from place to place. So your party is going to get a little bit scuffed in the process, and your party members are going to need to restore uses of their precious spells as well, as it happens in D&D games. So you are going to need to take a break from time to time. And your camp interface allows you to take care of a few things. You can cook meals that you can eat for extra bonuses that are useful in combat. You can do some alchemy and replenish some of the potions that you've used, and you can rest for the night. Now there are persistent conditions in Zoria like curses, poison, and bleeding. And in order to get rid of those, you need to drink the appropriate potion, or you need to ask the right party member to do something about it while you are camping. So while you are resting, you can ask your thief, for example, to look after your poisoned characters, or you can ask your priest to dispel lingering curses. Your weapon and armor also get damaged during combat encounters, and if you have a lancer in your party, you can ask him or her to do some repairs while you rest. But more importantly, all of these processes are simple and straightforward. You can manage them easily in your camp interface, and it makes your choice of companions for each adventure matter. Zoria isn't perfect, of course, far from it in fact. The game sometimes feels painfully unfinished, some character portraits seem consistent with the game's artistic direction, but some others have thick green strokes around them and feel like placeholder assets. The same is true of the voice acting. I don't generally like when games are only partially voiced. To me, it's an all or nothing deal, but in Zoria, characters sometimes go silent while they're in the middle of a sentence, and some of the voices sound like they are AI generated. The sound mix is painfully amateurish, and the writing is all over the fucking place. There is a compelling story with high stakes and a pretty decent mystery aspect holding it all together, but while some passages rival Tainted Grail Conquest or Darkest Dungeon in sounding properly ancient and obscure, some others feel like they were written by the creative masterminds behind the Rings of Power. All in all, for $13, which is what it currently goes for in both Steam and Good Old Games, Zoria Age of Shattering, despite its atrocious title, is a very good deal. Just don't expect there to be anything worthy of your memoir. The meh. Heart West 2.
Whatever. You shouldn't have trusted me.
Yeah, I guess I shouldn't have. Heart West 2 is a game by Good Sheperd, the mad geniuses who gave us Monster Train, one of the best card battlers there's ever been. Monster Train featured impeccable user experience, a strong artistic vision, and excellent production values, and it also made it abundantly clear that the chaps that Good Sheperd worked with on this occasion have a deep understanding of what makes a card battler fun, challenging, and fulfilling. And yeah, very addictive. And 2 years ago, they released Heart West 2, a Western-themed tactical shooter that's barking at the same tree as Xcom Enemy Unknown. Heart West 2 is not a bad game. In fact, it had the potential to be one of the best games of the decade. Its gameplay mix is original and it features many RPG mechanics that have always felt like they belong in the tactical turn-based arena. Your companions, for example, feel more like RPG companions than like average upgradable soldiers, which is usually the case in the genre. In Heart West 2, your companions have quirky personalities, and they all have a part to play in the story. It somewhat reminds me of Desperados 3. The game even features a companion approval system. During the conversations, and yes, conversations are a thing in this game, you can take the side of your companions to increase their approval score. And the friendlier they become, the more helpful they are going to be in the game in combat and non-combat situations. One of your companions can speak with the dead, for example, which can come in handy for a mini-quest or two. But she'll only volunteer to do it if you have a high enough level of approval with her. More importantly, you can unlock powerful combat talents in your companions if they reach a certain approval score. Also, there are several conversations to be had with the various NPCs in the game, in which you can choose what to say or what to do, RPG style. You also have a super clever progression mechanic that involves collecting poker cards and equipping them on your characters. If you equip them with 3 of a kind, for example, you unlock certain bonuses, but the bonuses are even greater if they have a full house or a straight flush. You also have area maps that you can explore with points of interest and secondary quests. In some of these places, your companions can lend a hand with their expertise to get the best results. Hard West 2 also features fantastic music, good graphics, very good voice acting, and very good sound design. So everything seems to be great about Hard West 2. Why is it in the meh tier then? Yes, everything about Hard West 2 is great.
Apart from, of course, playing the game part.
Hard West 2 shoots itself not in the foot, but in the fucking head with 3 lethal bullets, which in my opinion knock the game off the great tier and down into the meh hellhole. And this is how I think it does that. First, the game gets worse as it goes, not better. The opening moments of Hard West 2 are impressive. The narration is great, the cinematic intro is exciting, the tutorial mission is super fun, and it shows everything that's great about the combat in the game. Narratively, it pulls the rug from under you with a holy shit what was that moment that sets the stage for a super cool adventure. I was ready to give it a 10 out of 10 in the first area. But from then on out, the story becomes progressively less interesting as it drags the same premise for the remainder of the adventure. And while every new mission adds a little something extra that we hadn't seen before, the excitement of the gameplay formula seems to wear off at a much quicker pace than the new features, situations, and characters get introduced. And by the time the credits roll, the game feels like it outstayed its welcome dozens of hours ago. Hard West 2 features competent tactical turn-based combat. Secondary objectives are particularly interesting. They are relevant to the story, they yield interesting loot, and they force you to play the game more efficiently, which is definitely not the case in Phoenix Point, a much better tactical turn-based game that has shitty secondary objectives. But whatever fun there is to be had with the core gameplay in Hard West 2 is completely pulverized with the second problem the game has, which I also think is the most important one. Second, you do not see all the enemies in the area, and therefore you cannot plan ahead. Knowing in Hard West 2 is not half the battle, as the JoJo's used to say. In Hard West 2, knowing is 100% of the battle. And save scumming is the only way to accumulate said knowledge, because you have no way of knowing how many enemies you're going to face, where they are going to come from, and the types of attack that they can do. You are always going to get caught with your pants around your ankles. And too many times in the game, save scumming made all the difference between critical failure and critical success for me. And this turns the gameplay into a forced trial and error deal that happens because you just don't have the information that you need to make decisions. But that wouldn't even be a deal breaker for me if it weren't for the fact that, third, the game takes forever to reload. Yup, Desperados 3 is a trial and error deal, but the game is perfectly aware of this, and that's why quick saving and quick loading are as fast as they can be. But Hard West 2 doesn't seem to be aware that it is indeed trial and error, the game. And just as it happens with the story and the missions, this trial and error dynamic gets worse the further you get into the game. Take this mission for example. Your initial goal is to decouple one of the train's wagons and point and laugh at the bad guys as they leave without their precious cargo. So you lay out your plan to achieve this. And because the mission parameters don't say anything about killing the bad guys, you don't pay attention to this and focus on decoupling the wagon like you're supposed to. But when you decouple the wagon, then the mission parameters get updated and now you have to kill the rest of the guards and steal some plants which are in a safe that's 3 wagons away. So, because I didn't know this was going to happen, my characters were positioned horribly when the mission parameters changed, and I failed spectacularly. But after reloading, I meticulously took care of all the guards, and positioned one of my companions right next to the safe where the plans I needed to steal were, and the rest of the party safely behind cover. So this mission was a piece of cake the second time around, but not because I had gotten better at the game, but because I had information that I didn't have the first time around, information that I only acquired by failing the mission the first time. I played the game in the hard difficulty, so it may be different in other difficulty levels, but I really don't see how anyone who's played Xcom, Phoenix Point, or any other similar tactical turn-based shooter can say, "Ah yes, just what the tactical turn-based world needed." All in all, Hard West 2 is a hard pass if you ask me. Gone rogue. Another game that could have been a banger, an indie banger, one of those games that comes out of nowhere to take the gaming world by storm and change its genre forever. Alas, that's not what happened with this game. What would you do if I told you that there was a tactical stealth game along the lines of Desperados 3, but with plenty of RPG elements? Instead of a fixed array of talents, like the ones you usually have in these games, there is a leveling system that allows you to allocate stat points and acquire skills. And what if I told you that there's opportunity cost attached to these skills? If you are really good with lockpicks, for example, you are probably going to be able to open every door and container, but this will come at the expense of not being able to access locations that require you to force open a gate with a crowbar. What if I told you that you have an inventory, and that for each mission you can choose to bring with you a number of items and gadgets like crowbars, bombs, lockpicks, and other goodies to aid you in the level, and that you can collect loot RPG style that you can later sell to a vendor or use to craft some other goodies? What if I told you that after every mission you go back to a stronghold of sorts where you can craft things, talk to people, pick up side quests, and engage in trade with merchants? What if I told you that during your missions there are people that you can talk to and you have dialogue options that may have an impact on the way the mission unfolds? I know what I would say.
Shut up and take my money!
Well, Gone Rogue has all of this and more. On the narrative end of things, the game brings to the table something that I think the gaming world desperately needs a heck of a lot more of. A story that takes place in the late 1930s in a fictitious European country that's ruled by a military dictatorship that demands loyalty from their citizens above all else. A country in which public servants need to use the customary introductions and farewells in their missives so as not to raise suspicion about their loyalty and commitment to the cause. A divided country in which those who have been given opportunities by the tyrant are now zealously loyal to the government and are willing to rat out even their neighbors and loved ones at the slightest hint of sedition. Tiny irrelevant spoiler coming your way. Your wife, in this game of course, works for the government and she knows that you are a dissident. One day you come home to discover that she's gone. She's left a letter in which she explains that she was torn between her love for you and her loyalty to the nation. And because of this, it would have been her moral obligation to rat you out. So she decided to ask for a transfer to a far-off place. And I think that should tell you all you need to know about how seriously this game takes itself. You are a thief, but you also oppose the government. And the game even gives you some agency over how much you want to get involved in an intricate plan, Operation Valkyrie style, that someone's hatching to strike a blow at the authorities. And I'm not gonna lie, I was thrilled with the whole premise. I loved each and all of those moving parts.
Apart from, of course, playing the game part.
But the road to hell is paved with good intentions, I suppose, and there's no better example of this saying than Gone Rogue. Tactical stealth missions along the lines of Desperados 3 constitute the core aspect of the gameplay mix in this title, and it's so fucking in Desperados 3, you have intricate level design, characters with amazing skills and fantastic cross-class synergies, a plethora of ways to go on about each challenge, and interactable objects that made it oh so satisfying to get shit done in the game. You could toss a coin and scare a bull and have it kick one of your marks to hell and gone. You could poison bottles of whiskey, sabotage church bells, and have them fall on a group of targets to make it seem like an accident. And all of these things were just alternative ways of getting shit done, because you could always rely on your skills and weapons to complete your tasks. You had fascinating achievements that made you want to try every mission again using a different approach. Objectives were varied and exciting, and they went from stealing stuff to killing bad guys to rescuing people to arson to daring escapes. The game was out there, man. Gone Rogue's core gameplay has breaking and entering, stealing, and staying out of people's cone of vision. That's it. That's all you're ever going to do in this game. And more often than not, the game is going to force you into doing things the one way they are supposed to be done. And I think this runs contrary to the very spirit of the genre, and it makes it tremendously sameish and boring. I would best describe Gone Rogue as a dollar store Desperados 3, but that's because I'm not sure there are 50-cent stores anywhere. and I can't help but think that, man, if me had joined efforts with Ascalon Games, the developers of Gone Rogue, instead of more unsavory creative partners, we could have gotten a masterpiece to remember. Gone Rogue goes for $5 on Steam right now, and some of the ideas packed into this title and the game's premise itself are worth thousands for sure. But I just can't tell you in good faith to fit this one into your backlog as it is. It's undercooked and painfully boring, I'm afraid, and that's just a pity. Divinity Chronicles: Journey to the West. Journey to the West is a competent card battler. The deck building aspect of the game has a decent tactical depth, and there's even a strategic dimension for you to sink your teeth into. It reminds me of Slay the Spire. There are different characters that you can play as, just as there are in Slay the Spire. And when I say different, I mean that after beating the game thoroughly as Wukong, the monkey god, I played the game again with another character and I had no idea what I was doing beyond the core gameplay mechanics themselves. And I think that's a good thing. It felt like playing the Silent after beating the game with the Ironclad in Slay the Spire. Areas consist of large maps with branching paths that feature a combination of regular combat encounters, elite combat encounters, and non-combat events, just like the maps you have in Slay the Spire. In addition to cards, there are relics that you collect that give you powerful permanent and temporary bonuses. One of them even allows you to ignore the map's branching paths for the next 3 stages, just like that one relic in Slay the Spire. I think you can begin to see the problem with this game, and if you don't, you probably are one of the game's developers. See, this could have been a phenomenal game in the year 2016, but it came out just last year. Journey to the West has more cards and more playable characters than Slay the Spire, yes. It bothers to tell a story over the course of the game, and each character has its own story, and this is something that Slay the Spire didn't do. It also introduces companions and minions, which wasn't a thing in Slay the Spire, and it also features different modes. One of them is like a survival mode, but with puzzle-like challenges, not unlike the Gwent puzzles that you had in Thronebreaker. But there's not a single thing in Journey to the West that we haven't seen before. There's not a single bone of originality here, and that's what happens when developers hyper-focus on mechanics rather than on what the users want. Some devs seem to think that replicating the mechanics of an already successful game, scaling up set mechanics, and throwing in a few other features is enough to achieve some degree of success. Well,
I got some bad news for you, sunshine.
It isn't. Tainted Grail Conquest is not in the same league as Slay the Spire or Monster Train as a card battler. I would even say that Journey to the West has greater tactical and strategic depth than Awakened Realms title. But while the developers of Journey to the West seem to have only wanted to give you a Chinese myth-themed, upscaled Slay the Spire experience, Awakened Realms wanted to steer something inside you. They wanted to drag you into a dark, sinister, Kafkian predicament. They wanted to toss you into a nightmarish limbo along with other hopeless dwellers sentenced to wander about aimlessly in a hell of their own making. And it made the case, by means of its character's story, that the only way to escape your hell was to help others through theirs. And to this I say, shut up and take my motherfucking money. This is one of the best games of the decade so far, so what the hell do I care if its tactical depth isn't as great as the one in Slay the Spire? What do I care if it doesn't have nut-grindingly difficult Covenant challenges like Monster Train? Things like the dialogue in which you ask a twisted creature to give you something that you don't know that you're going to need and he gives you a noose, and then figuring out what to do with the damn thing and the symbolism behind it all. The twisted characters who mirror their own sins, the sinister figure who serves as your guide but obviously has something to hide, the macabre music, the desolate town that you go back to after completing an area, all these things will stay with me forever. But I already have a hard time remembering even the most basic details about Journey to the West, and I played the damn thing for the last time only a few weeks ago. So no, pass on this one, I say. I say reward those who push the envelope, not those who shamelessly try to bank on others' ideas without adding anything of much value. The bad. Across the Obelisk. Across the Obelisk has a very positive user score on Steam, and it was published by Paradox no less, the same guys who've brought us amazing titles like Pillars of Eternity, Tyranny, Pentiment, and many others. It's a roguelike, party-based card battler that throws in quite a few RPG elements. Think Darkest Dungeon 2, but with cards instead of skills, and a very lighthearted and cartoonish approach to medieval fantasy. It has a map, just like the one in Darkest Dungeon 2, but some of the nodes are lengthy side quests that act like self-contained stories with locations, characters, and subplots. Many of them are mini dungeons with strange creatures and super cool loot, and I think Darkest Dungeon 2 could have benefited from something like this. It's also highly polished in terms of user experience, graphics are detailed and pretty, and everything looks bright and alive, even if the art is almost pixel by pixel the exact opposite of what I like. You have an RPG like meta progression too. Each character gets points that you can allocate in a talent tree, and many of these talents synergize pretty decently with the cards you get every run. So there's a fairly interesting build aspect to this game, and one that you have a lot more control over compared to other card battlers like Slay the Spire. Every time you win an encounter, each character gets a fairly broad array of cards from which to choose. So you can make your wizard, for example, focus on lightning damage and lightning-based crowd control by always going for those types of cards, and by making sure you choose the right talents to go with it every time you level. And at the beginning of each run, you can build your party with the 4 heroes of your choice, and all of them are quite different from each other. But Alex, I don't get it, I hear you say. Why is Across the Obelisk bad then? You guys don't like roguelikes, do you? Especially card battler roguelikes, I hear. Well, know this. Just like Hades and Tainted Grail Conquest make the most out of their roguelike design, making the typical features and mechanics of the model work in the game's favor rather than to its detriment, Across the Obelisk does the exact opposite thing. Everything you hate about the roguelike model is present here in ways that are borderline insulting. Acquiring new weapons and skills in Hades and advancing each of the characters' stories may aid your efforts towards reaching your ultimate goal, but your progress in the game ultimately feels like a result of you getting better. The same thing is true of games like Darkest Dungeon 2, Sifu, and Tainted Grail Conquest. But in Across the Obelisk, your progress in the game is hardwired to your meta progression. The very same builds and tactics that could barely get you through the first boss during your first runs will be enough to carry you all the way to the end after you've played the game for 30 or 40 hours. And this will be largely because after 30 or 40 hours, you will have unlocked permanent upgrades for the facilities you have in the game, better cards, and more passive bonuses on your talent trees. And this is shit. It's shit. Because even if you are a card battler savant, a seasoned veteran of Slay the Spire, Monster Train, and even online trading card games like Magic the Gathering and Gwent, you won't be able to beat this game until you have unlocked the good stuff that you need to beat it. And to me, this makes the game completely pointless. Also, randomness is an important part in card battlers. The most important thing in these games is to learn to adapt, not to stick to the one strategy that you know and hope that you get the cards that work with it. Building your deck as you go and with what you've been given is the name of the game in this genre. But in Across the Obelisk, randomness works against the tactical aspect of the game, not in its favor. In Slay the Spire, for example, you can always see what your opponent is about to do, and since you only have one character, you know every action is going to apply to that one character. And this lets you build a game plan for every round. In Darkest Dungeon 2, things are a little different. You don't exactly know which enemy is going to attack which party member, but you know that some enemy skills can only be used from and on some positions. And there are also different skills that you can use to funnel incoming damage onto one of your characters. But all this goes out the window in Across the Obelisk. There aren't any talents that you can use consistently to make some characters act like reliable protectors. Anyone can die at any given time, and it all feels extremely random. And this reduces the array of viable strategies to kill before you are killed approaches. So if you think in terms of Slayer, Seeker, Survivor types of challenges, you'll see that every encounter in Across the Obelisk is a Slayer type of challenge, and it gets boring and old really quickly. There was a lot of work put into this game, and in the hands of people who understand the pain points of card battler enjoyers and the type of challenges that card battler players want from their games, it could have been a pretty good game. But I don't think the developers of Across the Obelisk are those guys. Well, and that's what I have been playing. Let me know about the games that you have been playing and about whether or not I should give any of them a shot. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thank you for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you are seeing on this channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Come check us out on Discord if you don't mind all the boomer talk that goes on there. I personally love it and wouldn't change it for anything. Share the video if you thought it was cool, but most importantly, never stop gaming, but don't let gaming get in the way of your hopes and dreams. Bye everyone.